She had lived in the small house at the end of a quiet street for more than 30 years. The house was nothing fancy. Its paint was faded in some places, and the lawn was not always perfectly manicured. But it had a charm that no one else could match. Inside, it was filled with memories of a life built patiently over decades. The smell of old wood, the sound of the floorboards creaking, and the small garden out back, all these things felt like home. Every morning she would step out onto the porch with a cup of tea, looking at the trees swaying gently in the wind. She loved the rhythm of her street, the calmness, and the familiarity. Over the years, the neighborhood had changed. New people moved in, bringing new rules, new ideas, and sometimes new tensions. Slowly, a homeowners association, or HOA, began to take control. At first, it seemed harmless. Simple guidelines about paint colors, lawn care, and small maintenance issues were introduced. She followed them as best as she could, fixing small things when needed and keeping her home in reasonable condition. But the rules became stricter over time. Minor issues that once would have gone unnoticed were now being recorded, cited, and flagged. She started receiving letters from the HOA. At first, they were polite reminders. But as months went by, they became warnings. Fines were mentioned. Her mailbox started to fill with legal-sounding notices about violations that, honestly, she didn't always understand. She read each one carefully, sometimes more than once. She tried to comply, fixing the things she could, taking care of small repairs, and making sure her lawn looked neat. Still, the letters kept coming. Each time she thought she was done, another arrived. The stress began to build. At night, she would lie awake listening to the quiet hum of the street and think about what could happen next. Her house was not just a building. It was the place where she had raised a family, celebrated birthdays, held small gatherings, and even weathered difficult times. It was her sanctuary. And now, it felt like someone wanted to take it from her. Then came the woman from the HOA. She had a way of walking into a room, making everyone uncomfortable. She was loud, confident, and certain of her authority. Neighbors whispered about her, some admiring her boldness, others avoiding her entirely. When she arrived at the house, she didn't knock politely or introduce herself with a smile. She demanded to see records, inspected the lawn with a critical eye, and made notes as if she was a judge passing verdicts. The first meeting was awkward. The homeowner tried to explain her side calmly, pointing out that she had addressed most of the earlier warnings. But the woman from the HOA barely listened. Her replies were sharp, almost dismissive, and she made it clear that she expected full compliance immediately. The conversation ended with an ominous warning. Things would escalate if she didn't follow every rule exactly as dictated. Neighbors watched from a distance. Some shook their heads, quietly sympathizing. Others looked away, too afraid to get involved. Over time, the homeowner noticed subtle shifts in the neighborhood. People who once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact. Invitations to community gatherings became fewer. She realized that many were afraid of the HOA woman, afraid of the consequences if they spoke up or sided with someone resisting authority. The isolation was painful, but it also strengthened her resolve. Life went on in small, careful ways. She tended her garden, repaired the house where she could, and kept her routine steady. She did not want to give the HOA any reason to complain further. But each fine, each letter, and each unwelcome visit made her think more strategically. Giving in was never truly an option. The house was her life's work, and she could not simply walk away. Friends tried to support her. They offered advice, sometimes legal guidance, sometimes just a listening ear. Some suggested compromise, while others encouraged her to stand firm. She considered each suggestion, weighing her options carefully. The situation was delicate. One wrong move could escalate things beyond her control. Despite the stress, she refused to show fear. She understood that keeping calm was essential, both for her own peace of mind and to prevent giving the HOA any leverage. The pressure continued to build. New citations appeared almost weekly. Small details, previously ignored, were now pointed out. The HOA woman seemed determined to create a case against her. as if proving a point was more important than the welfare of the community. Letters escalated from polite reminders to threats of fines and penalties. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, carrying the weight of potential disaster. Yet the homeowner persisted, quietly documenting every interaction, every letter, and every visit. She kept records meticulously, knowing that one day they might serve her in ways no one could anticipate. Every morning, she would walk through her home. Looking at familiar objects and remembering the life she had built, she walked through the kitchen, running her hands over the counters where countless meals had been prepared. She passed the living room, where laughter and conversation had filled the air for years. Each room reminded her of resilience, patience, and the countless small victories that made a house a home. These memories gave her strength, even as the outside world became increasingly hostile. Meanwhile, the HOA woman continued her campaigns. She visited neighbors, spreading rumors subtly, making people doubt the homeowner's intentions. She highlighted minor imperfections and exaggerated them, creating an atmosphere of tension. Some neighbors, unsure of how to react, kept their distance. Others, worried about confrontation, sided with the HOA without even questioning the claims. The homeowner noticed these behaviors but chose to focus on her own actions, refusing to engage in petty arguments or gossip. Despite the mounting pressure, she remained committed to her principles. She treated the HOA woman politely during each encounter, refusing to let anger dictate her actions. Behind the scenes, however, she began developing a plan. She contacted local authorities, sought advice from professionals, and educated herself on her rights as a homeowner. Each step she took was deliberate and measured. She was not acting impulsively. She was preparing for the moment when her perseverance would be tested in a very public way. Neighbors began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. Where once she seemed stressed and withdrawn, now there was a quiet determination in her movements. She greeted people warmly, maintained her garden with care, and continued her routines with calm confidence. Those who observed closely could see that she was not defeated despite appearances. The house still belonged to her. She had no intention of letting anyone take it away without a fight. Over time, the story of her situation began to spread quietly through the neighborhood. People spoke in hushed tones about the ongoing battle with the HOA. Some admired her courage, while others feared becoming involved. It was a complicated mix of respect, concern, and curiosity. Yet, no one could deny that the woman living at the end of the street was standing firm, refusing to be intimidated. As weeks turned into months, the tension remained high. The letters kept coming, the visits continued, and the fines increased. Still, she maintained her composure. She knew that showing fear would only empower the HOA woman further. Every day, she reminded herself why she could not give up. Her home was more than just a physical structure. It was a testament to her life, her resilience, and her unwillingness to be bullied. Neighbors who once doubted her now watched closely, some gaining inspiration from her steadfastness. Quiet conversations began to take place, people sharing advice and discussing options. Slowly, she was no longer entirely alone in facing the challenges imposed by the HOA. While support was cautious and discreet, it was enough to remind her that she was not entirely isolated in her own quiet way. She began to prepare for the possibility of a confrontation. She reviewed documents, researched legal protections, and kept meticulous records of all interactions. Her home became a fortress of preparation and resilience. She understood that the situation could escalate further, but she was ready. Every small action she took was a step toward ensuring that her life and home would remain intact, no matter what the HOA attempted next. And so, life continued at the small house at the end of the quiet street. Morning tea on the porch, tending the garden, repairing what needed fixing, and quietly observing the comings and goings of the neighborhood. She moved with purpose, confidence, and an unspoken determination that no one could take away her home without a fight. The quiet strength she displayed was the first chapter in a story that no one in the neighborhood would forget, and it set the stage for the shocking events that were soon to come. The pressure from the HOA continued to grow, and each new day brought another layer of tension. Letters and fines were piling up faster than she could sort them, and every knock at the door made her heart race. She had long since learned that ignoring the problem only made it worse. But even responding cautiously felt like walking a tightrope. The woman from the HOA seemed relentless, inspecting her home as if it were a crime scene, pointing out the smallest flaws and hinting at the next level of penalties. It was clear that the situation was moving beyond simple complaints. One afternoon, she received a letter that made her blood run cold. It was a formal notice that the HOA intended to hold an auction for her property if she did not comply fully with all their demands. The words seemed to jump off the page, filling the room with a tension that was almost physical. Her first reaction was disbelief. How could they even consider something like this? This was her home, the place she had built over decades. The thought of losing it in an auction because of someone else's rigid rules felt unreal and terrifying. She spent hours pacing her living room, trying to calm her thoughts. Fear, anger, and frustration swirled inside her. But amid the storm of emotions, she found a quiet determination. Giving up was not an option. She had fought too hard to let her home slip away because of unfair pressure. She knew she had to think carefully, to act strategically, and to prepare for what was coming. She began gathering every piece of paper she had about her house: receipts, repairs, letters, and past communications. Everything needed to be organized, documented, ready to prove her case. The neighbors were watching too, though from a distance. Some were curious, some worried, and others openly afraid. Over time, the homeowner realized that the fear of confrontation had created a wall of silence around her. People wanted to help but were too scared of the HOA's scrutiny. They whispered about her bravery, about the way she had not bowed down to intimidation, but no one stepped forward openly. She understood their hesitation, but knew she had to rely on herself more than ever. Her daily routine became a balancing act. She continued to care for her garden, keeping it neat and inviting, as if to show that the home was loved and maintained. She repaired small damages and painted where necessary. But she also devoted time to preparing for potential legal battles. She contacted local organizations that offered advice to homeowners. She read through pages of regulations, learning what the HOA could and could not legally enforce. Knowledge became her shield. Understanding her rights gave her strength she didn't realize she had until now. As the weeks went by, the HOA escalated their tactics. The woman responsible for the complaints began visiting other homes in the neighborhood, speaking in a manner that suggested she held power over everyone. People whispered behind closed doors about what might happen if they showed support for the homeowner. Rumors were spread that if anyone assisted her, they could become targets as well. It was a quiet, insidious form of intimidation. But it became clear that the homeowner was facing not only an institutional challenge, but also a social one. She was isolated, and the HOA woman was using fear to ensure no one would come to her aid, despite the mounting pressure. The homeowner's resolve only grew. She spent evenings sitting at her kitchen table, carefully planning her next moves. Each letter from the HOA was cataloged and analyzed. Each visit from the representative was recorded in detail. She was building a case that would make it impossible for anyone to unjustly claim her home. The process was exhausting, both mentally and emotionally. But she knew that careful preparation was her best weapon. Support did start to come, albeit quietly. A few neighbors, those who had witnessed the way the HOA had treated her, began offering advice behind closed doors. Some suggested legal contacts, while others simply provided moral support, encouraging her not to back down. Even though their help was subtle and private, it reminded her that she was not completely alone. There were people who admired her courage and who were quietly rooting for her to succeed. One afternoon, the HOA woman showed up unannounced. She inspected the lawn, measured distances between fences, and took notes as if she were writing a report for someone higher up. The homeowner greeted her politely, concealing the storm of thoughts that ran through her mind. She answered questions calmly, even when the inquiries felt unreasonable. Inside, she was mentally reviewing every possible defense, thinking several steps ahead. She knew that showing composure in the moment could make a difference in how others perceived the situation. As the days passed, she realized that the HOA's tactics were becoming more aggressive. Notices of fines increased, and new, often contradictory rules seemed to appear overnight. She kept meticulous records of each one, noting the dates, the content, and any discrepancies. Every action she took was deliberate, aimed at building a clear, undeniable history of compliance and reasonableness on her part. It became a mental game as much as a practical one, a test of patience, strategy, and endurance. The homeowner also began preparing for the possibility that the auction might actually happen. She spoke quietly with legal advisors, learning how to challenge an auction legally, how to submit evidence, and how to ensure her rights were protected. She made copies of everything, stored documents safely, and developed a plan to reveal any unfair practices at the right moment. It was painstaking work, but each step made her feel a little more in control, a little less at the mercy of the HOA's whims. Throughout this time, her emotional resilience grew. Mornings started with a sense of purpose, a quiet determination that no one could take away her home without a fight. She tended to her garden, prepared meals, and kept the house orderly, using the routines as a way to maintain calm amid chaos. The familiar tasks of daily life became acts of resistance, quiet ways of saying that she would not be intimidated or driven out. She also began reaching out discreetly to local organizations that specialized in homeowner rights. They offered advice, explained legal nuances, helped her understand how to present her case in the clearest, most compelling way. These connections became lifelines, providing both knowledge and reassurance. The more she learned, the more confident she felt. The sense of isolation that the HOA tried to impose began to fade, replaced by a growing network of quiet support and practical guidance. At the same time, the neighborhood was beginning to notice changes. The once powerful aura of the HOA woman seemed less intimidating in the face of someone who was calm, organized, and unwavering. People whispered among themselves, realizing that the homeowner was not just fighting back, but doing so in a way that commanded respect. Even those who had been afraid to speak began to quietly observe and consider that perhaps they too had the right to stand up against unreasonable authority. Despite the victories in spirit, the threat of the auction loomed over every day. Letters and warnings continued, growing more urgent, more insistent, and more intimidating. She knew that the situation could erupt into a public confrontation at any moment. The anticipation was exhausting, yet it also fueled her determination. Each action, each piece of documentation, each conversation with legal advisors was a step toward a final confrontation in which she would prove that her home belonged to her and that no amount of intimidation could change that. Evenings were spent planning for all possible scenarios. She practiced how she would respond to an auction announcement, how she would address a room full of neighbors, officials, or representatives. She anticipated questions, prepared counterarguments, and rehearsed remaining calm under pressure. Each rehearsal strengthened her confidence, making her feel more prepared for the inevitable showdown. The tension that once threatened to overwhelm her was now being channeled into focus, strategy, and quiet determination. Throughout this period, she never lost sight of the life she had built in the house. Every memory, every object, every corner of the home represented decades of effort, love, and resilience. She would not allow fear or intimidation to erase that history. Each day of preparation became not just a practical necessity, but also a personal affirmation. She had fought too hard and loved too deeply to simply surrender. Neighbors slowly began to whisper, not just about the conflict, but about the courage it revealed. They spoke of a quiet strength that could not be seen at first glance, of a determination that grew steadily in the face of relentless pressure. Even though most remained silent publicly, the homeowner could sense their admiration. It was a subtle, almost invisible network of support, but it mattered. It reminded her that the fight was not just about property. It was about standing up for what was right. In the midst of all this, she maintained her daily routines. Morning walks, tending the garden, preparing meals, and caring for the home's upkeep were all acts of resistance. They reminded her, and anyone who observed, that the house was loved, cared for, and deserved to remain hers. The mundane, ordinary acts of daily life became powerful statements in the face of relentless intimidation. As the weeks wore on, she became more adept at navigating the challenges. Each letter, each visit, each threat was met with careful analysis, measured responses, and meticulous record-keeping. The once overwhelming pressure from the HOA began to feel less like an unstoppable force and more like a challenge she was equipped to handle. Her preparation, her strategy, and her calm determination were slowly turning the tables. And so, life at the small house continued, filled with the quiet but intense preparation for what was coming next. Every day brought new challenges, new letters, new visits, and new fears. But she faced each one with careful planning, courage, and resilience. The auction threat loomed large, but she was no longer just a passive target. She was a homeowner, prepared to defend her life's work, quietly, patiently, and with unwavering determination. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would tase the day of the auction arrived with an air of tension that seemed to hang over the entire neighborhood. The sky was a dull gray, and a light breeze rustled the trees along the quiet street. She woke early, as usual, making tea and walking through her home with a calm, deliberate routine. Each step was a reminder that this house was hers, built over decades, filled with memories, and not to be taken lightly. Her nerves were steady, but alert, knowing that everything she had prepared would be tested in a matter of hours. Outside, neighbors had begun to gather, curious about what would happen. Some stood quietly on their porches. Others lingered in their driveways. The air was thick with anticipation, murmurs of speculation moving through the crowd like a subtle current. Many people assumed that the HOA had already won, that the homeowner would be forced to give up her house, and that the auction was merely a formality. The mood was tense, uncertain, and charged with the collective expectation of a dramatic outcome. She watched as the woman from the HOA arrived, clipboard in hand, moving with a confident, almost theatrical stride. Her presence seemed to command attention, and some neighbors straightened themselves as she passed. The woman smiled thinly, glancing around as if she owned the street, and approached the homeowner with an air of inevitability. She assumed she had the upper hand, believing that the homeowner was cornered and powerless. But she did not know the preparations that had been made, the careful documentation, and the quiet, steady resolve that lay beneath the calm exterior. The auction was about to begin. A small group of officials had arrived to oversee the proceedings, and a makeshift podium was set up near the house. The homeowner stepped forward, clutching the stack of papers she had spent weeks organizing. Each document was meticulously labeled, including repairs, letters, legal advice, and records of the HOA's attempts to intimidate her. She had prepared for every possible claim, every accusation, every tactic the HOA might use to force the auction through. The room of spectators, officials, and neighbors waited silently, the anticipation almost unbearable. The HOA woman began speaking, presenting her case with practiced authority. She listed alleged violations, fines, and claims of noncompliance, expecting to overwhelm the homeowner and intimidate the audience. She spoke with confidence, as if every word were a decree, as if no one could possibly question her authority. The homeowner listened patiently, noting each point, each exaggeration, each false claim. She did not interrupt, did not falter, and did not allow fear to show. Instead, she focused on the evidence she had gathered, preparing to respond with clarity and precision. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped forward calmly, holding the papers in a steady hand. She addressed each claim one by one, presenting facts, receipts, photographs, and legal guidance. Her voice was clear, steady, and composed. She explained how she had complied with rules where necessary, corrected minor issues promptly, and documented every interaction. She showed how the fines had been applied incorrectly and how the HOA had misused its authority. Each revelation brought murmurs from the crowd, a shift in the energy as people began to see the situation in a new light. The officials overseeing the auction were initially cautious, listening closely to both sides. The homeowner remained calm, providing clear, organized evidence that made it increasingly difficult for anyone to argue against her. She highlighted discrepancies in the HOA's claims, inconsistencies in letters and notices, and the repeated attempts to intimidate her without legal basis. Slowly, the perception of the audience began to change. The sense of inevitability that had surrounded the HOA's authority was breaking down, replaced by recognition of her careful preparation and unwavering determination. Neighbors whispered among themselves, shocked by the level of evidence and composure displayed. Some felt relief, seeing that the homeowner was not alone and that the situation might be resolved fairly. Others were surprised, realizing that the woman they had assumed would be forced out had in fact turned the tables. The quiet strength she had cultivated over months of preparation was now on full display, and it commanded respect from everyone present. The HOA woman's confidence began to waver. Her carefully constructed narrative was being challenged point by point. She had expected a quick, uncontested auction, display of authority that would leave the homeowner humiliated and powerless. Instead, she found herself confronted with facts she could not easily dismiss. A homeowner who had anticipated every move and an audience that was beginning to question her integrity. Her thin smile faltered, and a flicker of doubt crossed her face as she realized that the situation was no longer under her control. As the homeowner continued, she revealed a key piece of evidence: documentation of prior communications where the HOA had acknowledged compliance and yet continued to impose fines. The officials leaned in, reading the letters, nodding at the clear contradictions. The neighbors murmured, some expressing quiet approval. The sense of inevitability that had dominated the morning evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of justice taking its course. The auction, once seen as a certainty, was now in serious jeopardy. The homeowner also addressed the social pressures and intimidation tactics used by the HOA. She spoke about how neighbors had been discouraged from offering support, how rumors had been spread to isolate her, and how fear had been used as a tool to assert control. Each point was backed by careful documentation, reinforcing the reality that this was not a matter of minor rule enforcement, but of deliberate intimidation and misuse of authority. Her calm and factual presentation left little room for doubt, making it clear that the HOA's approach was unfair and unsustainable. Throughout the proceedings, she maintained a posture of dignity and composure. She did not allow anger or frustration to show, knowing that losing control would only play into the HOA's narrative. Instead, she relied on facts, organization, and clear communication. Her presence was steady, unwavering, and authoritative in its own quiet way. The contrast between her calm confidence and the HOA woman's faltering authority was striking, and the audience could sense it, even if they could not fully articulate why. As the auction moved forward, the officials began to ask questions, probing the validity of the HOA's claims. Each answer provided by the homeowner was precise, well-reasoned, and supported by evidence. The cumulative effect was powerful. What had begun as an event expected to result in her eviction was now turning into a demonstration of fairness, legality, and personal resolve. The room shifted from an atmosphere of tension and assumed loss to one of careful examination and emerging respect. Neighbors who had once avoided interaction began to show subtle signs of support. A few nodded quietly as she spoke. Others whispered encouragements to each other. The homeowner could sense that the tide was turning, that the careful preparation and steadfast determination she had invested over months was making a real difference. The long nights of organizing documents, contacting advisors, and rehearsing responses were paying off. The weight of the HOA's authority was diminishing before her eyes. The HOA woman, sensing the shift in energy, attempted to regain control. She raised her voice slightly, repeated earlier claims, and tried to assert dominance over the proceedings, but the homeowner was ready. Calmly, she countered each statement with documentation, factual evidence, and clear reasoning. The room, once tense with expectation of her defeat, now leaned in, listening closely, recognizing the unfairness that had been hidden for so long. The confidence of the HOA woman faltered further, and her attempts at authority rang hollow in the presence of undeniable facts. As the discussion progressed, the officials began to take formal notes, asking clarifying questions and reviewing evidence. The homeowner provided everything requested, ensuring transparency and full cooperation. Her behavior was professional, measured, and persuasive, leaving little room for misinterpretation. The audience of neighbors, officials, and other observers watched in silence, absorbing the unfolding reversal of expectations. What had started as a seemingly inevitable loss was becoming a clear demonstration of justice and preparedness. Finally, after hours of careful examination and detailed discussion, a decision was reached. The officials announced that the auction could not proceed due to procedural errors, inconsistencies in the HOA's claims, and the homeowner's thorough documentation proving compliance and fair treatment. The tension in the room lifted, replaced by a collective sense of relief and astonishment. The homeowner stood quietly, absorbing the moment. Knowing that months of preparation, patience, and perseverance had led to this outcome, neighbors approached cautiously, expressing admiration, surprise, and congratulations. Some offered quiet apologies for doubting her ability to withstand the pressure. The HOA woman, once confident and domineering, looked visibly shaken. Her authority had been challenged publicly and effectively, and she had no choice but to accept the ruling. The homeowner had turned what seemed to be an inevitable loss into a powerful demonstration of resilience, preparation, and courage. In the aftermath, the homeowner returned to her house, walking through each room with a renewed sense of ownership and pride. The garden, the walls, the floors, and every familiar object seemed to radiate the strength of her perseverance. She had faced immense pressure, intimidation, and uncertainty, yet she had remained calm, strategic, and unwavering. Her home, her life's work, and her dignity were intact. The street, once tense with the anticipation of loss, now seemed calmer, respectful, and quietly inspired by her actions. The day of the auction had not gone as anyone expected. What was intended to be a public humiliation turned into a public vindication. The homeowner had not only protected her home, but had also revealed the flaws, overreach, and misuse of authority by the HOA. The event became a story that neighbors would talk about for months. After the dramatic halt of the auction, the neighborhood felt different. The tension that had filled the air for months began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet curiosity and cautious admiration. People who had once avoided the homeowner now approached her with smiles, small words of encouragement, and quiet congratulations. The atmosphere was one of reflection, as neighbors slowly realized the extent of the pressure she had endured and the strength she had shown in standing her ground. The homeowner spent the morning walking through her garden, noting the small flowers that had bloomed despite the stressful months, and the lawn that had remained neat and tended. Each plant, each patch of soil, seemed to symbolize resilience and perseverance. She paused often, reflecting on how much effort and patience had brought her to this point. The journey had been long and exhausting, but the results were undeniable. Her home was safe, and the truth had been revealed in front of everyone. Word of the halted auction spread quickly. Neighbors who had not been present came to the house to learn the story firsthand. Some expressed disbelief, unable to comprehend how someone had faced such intense pressure and come out victorious. Others quietly admitted that they had feared the homeowner would lose, yet they had now witnessed the power of preparation, knowledge, and calm determination. The homeowner greeted each visitor politely, listening to their reactions without pride or arrogance, simply acknowledging the support and the surprise that had grown around her. Meanwhile, the woman from the HOA was forced to confront the reality of her position. The confidence she had exuded during her visits and at the auction was now replaced with tension, defensiveness, and uncertainty. The officials overseeing the proceedings had clearly documented the missteps, the overreach, and the improper handling of the homeowner's case. The balance of power had shifted, and the HOA's credibility had been undermined. The neighborhood could see that the authority which had once seemed unshakable could, in fact, be questioned and held accountable. In the days following the auction, the homeowner continued to review all documentation, ensuring that any future attempts by the HOA would be icily countered. She strengthened her records, organized new evidence, and maintained detailed logs of interactions. While the immediate threat had been stopped, She understood that vigilance was necessary to prevent a repeat of the situation. Her approach was methodical, calm, and unrelenting. Every action she took reinforced her preparedness, her resilience, and her commitment to protecting what she had built. Neighbors began speaking more openly about the HOA and the challenges that had been faced. Small groups formed to discuss what had happened, sharing stories of their own experiences and considering how they might respond if confronted with similar issues. The homeowner became a quiet leader in these conversations, not by seeking attention, but by setting an example of strength, preparation, and measured action. People began to see that standing firm against intimidation was not only possible, but necessary for fairness and justice in the community. The emotional impact on the homeowner was profound. While she had spent months under stress and pressure, she now felt a sense of relief, pride, and validation. Every sleepless night, every careful plan, and every small action had contributed to the outcome. She recognized the personal growth that had occurred through this struggle, the courage that had been tested, and the wisdom gained from navigating a difficult, high-stakes situation. She knew that this experience would remain with her, a reminder of her strength and ability to face challenges head-on. The HOA woman, on the other hand, faced scrutiny from the community and the officials involved. Her methods, previously unquestioned, were now examined carefully, exposing the misuse of authority and intimidation tactics. Conversations among neighbors revealed a growing awareness that fairness, transparency, and accountability were essential for any governing body, including a homeowners association. The contrast between the homeowner's calm, factual approach and the HOA woman's aggressive tactics highlighted the importance of integrity, preparation, and patience in resolving conflicts. As weeks passed, the neighborhood slowly adjusted to the new reality. The homeowner's resilience had set a precedent, demonstrating that rules should be applied fairly and that intimidation would not go unchallenged. People began to engage more openly with one another, share experiences, and consider the implications of unchecked authority. The homeowner's actions had created a ripple effect, inspiring others to think critically, act carefully, and stand up for their rights when necessary. The homeowner continued her daily routines, finding comfort and strength in the familiar rhythms of her life. Mornings spent in the garden, afternoons repairing and maintaining the house, evenings reviewing documentation, and planning for any potential future challenges became a source of empowerment. Each small, ordinary task was a reminder that her home, her life, and her dignity had been preserved through perseverance, intelligence, and calm determination. The victory was not just about the house. It was about reclaiming control over her life and her environment. Neighbors who had once feared the HOA began to express gratitude and admiration. Quiet conversations, small gestures of support, and subtle acknowledgement of her strength created a sense of community that had been absent for months. The homeowner, while appreciative, remained humble, recognizing that her actions had set an example rather than seeking personal recognition. She understood that the outcome was a result of careful planning, preparation, and a refusal to succumb to fear, and that this example could benefit others in the neighborhood. The homeowner also reflected on the importance of preparation, knowledge, and calm decision-making. Each document, each conversation, and each careful step had contributed to the reversal of what seemed an inevitable loss. She recognized that courage alone was not enough. Strategic thinking, attention to detail, and careful observation were equally vital. The experience had taught her that challenges, no matter how intimidating, could be overcome with patience, intelligence, and a clear plan. In addition to personal reflection, she began to consider ways to share her experience with others in the community. By explaining the process, the documentation, and the careful steps taken to protect her home, she hoped to empower neighbors who might face similar challenges. Her approach emphasized the value of knowledge, preparation, and calm, measured action, highlighting the difference between reactionary fear and strategic perseverance. Through this, she aimed to foster a sense of empowerment and awareness within the neighborhood. The HOA, facing increased scrutiny, began to revise procedures and review practices to ensure compliance with legal standards. The homeowner's careful documentation and clear presentation of evidence had exposed weaknesses and overreach, prompting change. The neighborhood witnessed the tangible impact of standing firm and acting with integrity, and the homeowner's example served as a reminder that accountability could be achieved without aggression or hostility. Throughout this period, the homeowner maintained her focus on daily life and personal well-being. She continued to nurture her garden, care for the home, and engage with neighbors in thoughtful, respectful ways. Each interaction reinforced the lessons learned: patience, preparation, and calm persistence could yield powerful results. The victory over the immediate threat of the auction was not an endpoint, but a catalyst for continued vigilance, personal growth, and strengthened community ties. As time went on, the story of her struggle and eventual triumph became a quiet legend in the neighborhood. New residents were told of the homeowner who had faced immense pressure, intimidation, and the looming threat of losing her home, yet had prevailed through intelligence, preparation, and steadfast courage. Her example inspired others to approach challenges thoughtfully, stand up for their rights, and act with integrity in the face of adversity. The impact extended beyond the immediate conflict, fostering a culture of awareness, respect, and empowerment within the community. The homeowner's life returned to a sense of balance and calm. She continued her routines, cared for her home, and engaged with neighbors in ways that reinforced community bonds. The immediate threat had passed, but the lessons learned remained vivid. She had demonstrated that strength could be quiet yet powerful, that preparation and knowledge were essential tools, and that courage was most effective when combined with strategic action. Her victory was not just about retaining her home, but about reclaiming agency, asserting fairness, and inspiring a neighborhood to recognize the value of integrity and resilience. In the weeks and months that followed, the neighborhood's atmosphere shifted. Conversations became more open, and neighbors began to consider the importance of fairness, transparency, and community support. The homeowner's example had revealed the impact of standing firm against intimidation and misuse of authority, encouraging others to approach challenges with thoughtfulness, preparation, and courage. The HOA, having faced scrutiny, adjusted practices to ensure more equitable treatment of residents, reinforcing the lessons learned from this confrontation. Through all of this, the homeowner remained grounded, continuing daily routines with quiet determination and care. Her home, once under threat, now stood as a symbol of resilience, preparation, and unwavering commitment. The months of pressure, planning, and strategic action had culminated in a victory that extended beyond her personal experience, leaving a lasting impression on the community and creating a legacy of empowerment, integrity, and calm strength that would endure for years to come. In the weeks following the halted auction, life at the small house slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. Though the events of recent months lingered in the air like a quiet echo, the homeowner moved through her home with a renewed sense of calm and control. Aware of the strength and preparation that had guided her through the ordeal, every room held the memories she had protected, each object a testament to years of effort, love, and resilience. Her routines, once disrupted by stress and uncertainty, now became anchors of stability, allowing her to reclaim the rhythm of daily life. Neighbors who had witnessed her struggle began to approach with a mix of curiosity, respect, and admiration. Some came to offer apologies for doubting her, while others shared stories of their own encounters with the HOA, expressing gratitude for her example. Quiet conversations grew in frequency, and the community slowly began to rebuild the trust and support that had been eroded by fear and intimidation. The homeowner, always modest and thoughtful, received these gestures with quiet acknowledgement, understanding that her role was not to seek recognition but to demonstrate resilience and fairness. The HOA woman, once confident and authoritative, had retreated from the neighborhood's attention. Her attempts at intimidation and control had been exposed, and her credibility had suffered. Conversations among neighbors reflected a shift in perception. They spoke cautiously about her tactics, recognizing the misuse of authority and the dangers of unchecked power. The homeowner's steadfast approach had set a precedent, illustrating that preparation, knowledge, and calm determination could overcome even the most aggressive forms of intimidation. The homeowner continued to strengthen her defenses, ensuring that no future attempts could threaten her home. She kept meticulous records, reviewed legal guidelines, maintained open communication with advisors and supportive neighbors. Her approach was not driven by fear, but by prudence and foresight. She understood that vigilance was key, that maintaining control over her own life required consistent attention and careful planning. Each day of preparation reinforced her confidence, allowing her to move forward with clarity and purpose.